Gunnar's Daughter, Chapter 16. They came home from the Seder in late autumn. That winter, again, Vigdis was only moderately well, and she was greatly disquieted when care of Grefsen and his kinsmen began to treat with Gunnar, that he should marry her to care. Vigdis begged that the matter might stand over for a time, saying she was unwilling to be married so young. In the end, Gunnar promised care an answer by autumn, but Vigdis saw that her father had set his mind on this marriage. Vigdis said she would not dwell at the Seder that summer. One evening in spring, she walked out over the meadows. It was toward sunset and fine weather, just at the time when the birches come into leaf and the birds are singing. There was a pleasant smell in leaves and grass, and Vigdis thought she would walk and try to forget her sorrow. South of the manor dwelt a woman in a little hut. She was married to one of Gunnar's housecarls. She sat on the threshold spinning on a distaff as Vigdis went past, and Vigdis stopped and spoke to her. There was a child crying inside the hut. Vigdis said, "That child cries as though it were in great sorrow. It cannot be very young, for I have noticed that newborn babes scream so horridly, more like a cat or an owl than any human sound." The woman went in and took the child on her arm. It was a little girl of 2 years or more. She was quiet again as soon as her mother had her, and after a while she crawled down and ran about plucking flowers. She was still so small that when she bent down, she tripped over her frock and fell. Vigdis picked her up, and then the child gave her the flowers she had in her hand. But she had plucked them without stalks, so Vigdis dropped them at once. Then her mother said, "These flowers are called Night and Day. Take one, Vigdis, and give it to me. Then I will tell your fortune." Vigdis did so, and the other said, "It has first 2 dark petals and then 2 light. But I see the lowest petal is light at the center and dark at the edge. That means that at first you will have great sorrows, but afterwards much joy. That dark edge to the last petal is a bad sign. It betokens no good for your old age." Vigdis answered, "That is a bad prophecy, methinks, and I have not asked you to tell my fortune either, but I must reward you nevertheless." With that, she took a little filigree brooch from her bosom and gave it to the woman. Then she went on. There was a slab of rock out in the meadow. Around it grew some rowan trees and briars, and the grass below was full of night and day. When Vigdis reached it, she sat down, clasped her knee in her hands, and looked out over the fjord, which lay shining grandly in the south, now that the sun had gone behind the hills. She stayed sitting thus for a long time, and little comfort had she in her thoughts, whether she remembered Yacht or called to mind that which she had hidden up in the forest. She had often wondered whether it lay there yet, or whether it was wholly devoured. She remembered clearly that in the place where she had lain that night were many ants and other foul creeping things, and although she had little kindness for the child she had borne, it seemed a horrid thought that the ants might have crawled over it before it was dead. She rose up when darkness was coming on, and walked homewards so quickly that she almost ran. On coming near the manor, she met Asha, who said, "You gave me such a horrid fright, foster daughter. I did not know what to think when you stayed out so long, you who are so afraid of the dark." Vigdis answered, "Afraid of the dark I am now, and of the forest, and afraid at home in my own bower. Wretched is my life, and better were it for me to take an end of it." "Do not say such dreadful things," said Asha. "All may yet be well with you. You are young enough to forget your wrongs, and for aught anyone knows, you are a maiden pure. Care loves you, and with him you will have an easy and honorable lot." "That now seems to me the worst of all," replied Vigdis. "I think it were better that my shame were made known openly, even if my father drove me out of his house. There's nothing worse than to be forced to jest and seem merry as I used to be, when I can never turn my mind from the misery that has befallen me. And it is no great help to me if they believe me hereabouts to be a pure and undefiled maid, when there are 3 of us who know it is not so. I bear the secret mark of it on my body. I know not how to save myself, now that care has begun to press his suit. That evening, as they sat alone in the bower, Vigdis took this up again and said to Asha, "Might you have a mind, foster mother, to go south to your kinsfolk among the Sounds? You have often said they were of no meaner birth than our kin here." Asher answered, "I know not whether my kinsfolk be alive or dead, and now it is too late for me to seek them out or change my condition. But why do you ask of this?" Vigdis was silent a long time, but at last she said, "In old days, whenever I was sorrowful, I would go to you and sit in your lap. But now it has come about that I am more secret with you, Asha, than with any other." Asha made no answer, and the other spoke again. "I now regret that I set out that child, for every night it wakes me with such horrid screaming. But evil fortune should harden my heart, as I would have it." "What mean you by that?" asked Asha. "It were my best revenge," replied Vigdis, "if Yat's son became Yat's slayer. Not lightly would he escape from the dog I reared with hate and blows, till he had his teeth in Vigayat's throat." Then Asha said in a very low voice, "Now I would fain know whether you mean that." "I do so," replied Vigdis, and her foster mother went on. "Then it is best I tell you that the boy you bore last summer is with Skofti, my son." Vigdis rose from the bench on which she sat. She stood for a moment, speechless and pale as a corpse. Then she flung herself down and wept with her head on the table. Asha said, "None need get to know of it, and my advice is that it be kept hidden as before. But I have told you, in case you desire to see your son." But Vigdis lay lamenting and said, "I thought I was already so unhappy that my life could not be made worse. But now I can no longer bear to live in these parts, when I know that boy is here, and my eyes may light upon him. 'Twas bad luck I was so tired and wretched I had not the strength to throw him into the lake. I do not believe you have told me the truth." Then Asha went to her chest, took out a linen cloth and handed it to Vigdis. She looked at it. It was the same she had had on that night. It still bore the stains of blood, and moss and mold clung in the folds. She flung it on the floor and said, weeping, "Now my father will know all. I will not live if I have to beg Skofti or any other to keep my secret. Never did I think you would fail me so badly." Asha answered, "When I awoke that morning and you were not in your bed, I was frightened and bade Skofti search for you. He found the boy and picked him up. We thought him so handsome a child that Skofti offered to rear him. But I have told you this because I thought it might console you somewhat to hear you had the fairest child alive." "Well, now it must turn out as it may," said Vigdis, "for I am weary of this life." Asha answered, "You must not do this. Honorable birth is of little avail. She who has to bear a shame will be brought low. That has been my fate, as I shall tell you. Afterwards, you must make your choice."